All right, so get this. We breathe thousands of times every day without even thinking about it, but have you ever, stopped to think about what's actually happening inside you with every inhale and exhale?
Right.
Today, we're going to deep dive into the mechanics of respiration.
Yeah.
And to guide us, we've got Dr. Rasha Eldeeb's physiology handout.
Okay.
Get ready to be amazed because it's way more intricate than you might think.
Oh, it really is. We often take breathing for granted, but it's this remarkably complex process that involves like a whole symphony of muscles and pressures and neural signals working together in perfect harmony.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. When we breathe in inspiration, it's not just air casually strolling into our lungs, is it?
No, not at all. It's an active process, meaning our bodies actually have to put in effort to make it happen.
Huh.
And the star of the show here is your diaphragm, that dome-shaped muscle that sits right below your lungs.
The diaphragm, I always thought of it as like a passive barrier between my chest and my abdomen.
Oh, it is far from passive. When you inhale, your diaphragm contracts and pulls downwards.
Okay.
So imagine like pulling down on a handle attached to its central tendon.
Okay.
This downward movement increases the length of your chest cavity, creating that space for air to rush in.
So it's actually creating the vacuum that sucks the air in.
Exactly. And get this, the diaphragm is responsible for a whopping 75% of the effort needed for inspiration.
Whoa.
So that means even when you're just chilling on the couch, your diaphragm is doing the heavy lifting to make sure you're getting enough oxygen.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive, right?
That's wild. I never realized it was working that hard all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm guessing it doesn't act alone. Don't those muscles between my ribs, play a role too?
You are absolutely right. The external intercostal muscles, the ones nestled between your ribs, they're key players in inspiration. They act like bucket handles, lifting your ribs upwards and outwards.
So the diaphragm pulls down, the ribs lift up, and out it's creating space in every direction.
Precisely. And all this combined effort creates a slight decrease in pressure inside your chest cavity, just enough to draw that precious air in.
It's amazing how these subtle pressure changes can drive this whole process, but what happens when we need to take a really deep breath, like after a sprint or something?
Oh, that's when the backup singers of your respiratory system step in? The accessory muscles?
Backup singers. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So first, you've got the sternocleidomastoid muscles, those prominent ones in your neck, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ever notice how they pop out when you take a deep breath? They help lift your sternum, which gives your chest even more room to expand.
Okay.
Then there's the serratus anterior, which elevates several ribs, further expanding your chest sideways.
Uh-huh.
And finally, we have the scalene muscles, which lift the first rib, helping create space at the very top of your chest cavity.
So it's a full body effort to get that satisfyingly deep breath.
It really is.
Yeah.
And by working together, these accessory muscles, they increase the chest cavity in all three dimensions, allowing you to take in that maximum amount of air. It's pretty remarkable how the body orchestrates all of this without us even realizing it.
Speaking of remarkable, I read in the handout that even if the diaphragm is somehow paralyzed, the external intercostal muscles can still handle moderate activity. That's pretty incredible.
That's right. The body has this amazing ability to adapt and find workarounds. The external intercostals might not be as efficient as the diaphragm, but they can definitely step up to the plate when needed.
Okay, so we've covered breathing in, but what about breathing out? I mean, do we have to put in the same amount of effort to exhale as we do to inhale?
That's where things get interesting.
Yeah.
Unlike inspiration, which is an active process, expiration is usually passive during normal breathing.
Wait, really? So we don't even have to use muscles to breathe out. How does that work?
It all comes down to a concept called elastic recoil.
Oh.
Think of it like stretching a rubber band. When you let go, it naturally snaps back to its original shape.
Okay, so are you saying our lungs are like giant rubber bands?
Well, not literally, but the principle is similar. Our lungs and chest wall have this inherent elasticity, this natural tendency to return to a resting state after being stretched during inspiration. So when you relax those inspiratory muscles, the elastic recoil of your lungs and chest wall kicks in, gently squeezing the air out.
Whoa. So I'm basically not doing anything when I breathe out. It's just my body being awesomely efficient.
Exactly. But of course, there are times when we do need to put in a little more effort to exhale.
Like when?
Well, think about when you're exercising. Your body needs to get rid of carbon dioxide and bring in more oxygen much faster, so your expiratory muscles have to work a bit harder to push the air out more forcefully, more rapidly.
Makes sense. So it's like shifting from automatic to manual mode when we need that extra boost. But are there any other times when we might need to actively exhale?
Absolutely. People with certain respiratory conditions like asthma or emphysema, they often have to rely more on active exhalation because their airways are constricted or their lungs have lost some of their elasticity.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like their bodies have to work harder to overcome those obstacles. So what muscles are involved when we need to actively push the air out?
You might be surprised to hear that your abdominal muscles, those core powerhouses, they play a key role in active exhalation. When they contract, they increase pressure in your abdomen, which in turn pushes your diaphragm upwards, squeezing the air out of your lungs.
So it's like squeezing a balloon from the bottom to force the air out the top?
That's a great analogy. And we can't forget about the internal intercostal muscles. They act in opposition to their external counterparts, pulling the ribs downwards and further reducing the volume of the chest cavity.
So we have this whole team of muscles working together to make sure we get that air out efficiently.
Exactly. And this beautifully orchestrated interplay of muscles, it's happening every time you breathe, whether it's a gentle sigh or a powerful exhale during a workout.
It's truly amazing how much is going on beneath the surface of something as, like, seemingly simple as breathing.
It really is. And it's worth pointing out that breathing isn't just this random series of inhalations and exhalations. There's a rhythm to it, a cycle that repeats itself with remarkable consistency.
Oh, I noticed that in the handout, Dr. Eldeeb calls it the respiratory cycle. So it's more than just breathing in and out.
Exactly. A complete respiratory cycle includes a short inspiration, a longer expiration, and something called an expiratory pause.
A pause. You mean we actually stop breathing for a moment?
Well, not entirely, but during this brief pause, the glottis, that little opening between your vocal cords, it closes. And you know what's really cool? You can actually feel this pause in your own breathing if you pay close attention.
Hold on, let me try. Wow, you're right. I never realized that little break was built into my breathing rhythm. It's such a subtle thing, but it makes sense.
Right. It highlights the intricate control mechanisms at play, ensuring that each breath is perfectly timed and coordinated. And speaking of control, we can't talk about the mechanics of breathing without discussing the role of pressure.
Okay, yeah. Pressure seems to be at the heart of this whole process, but don't hold back. Tell me everything about these respiratory pressures.
Let's start with intraalveolar pressure, which is simply the pressure inside the tiny air sacs in your lungs, those millions of alveoli where gas exchange takes place.
So what happens to this pressure as we breathe in and out?
It fluctuates ever so slightly throughout the respiratory cycle. During inspiration, the pressure inside the alveoli becomes slightly negative compared to the atmospheric pressure outside. We're talking about a difference of just 1 millimeter of mercury, or mmHg, but that tiny difference is enough to draw air into the lungs. Then, during expiration, the pressure inside the alveoli becomes slightly positive again, just 1 mmHg higher than atmospheric pressure pushing the air out.
It's crazy how these tiny pressure changes can drive this whole process. But I remember reading about how those pressures can change dramatically in certain situations.
You're thinking of Valsalva's maneuver and Muller's maneuver.
What were those again?
Think about when you're trying to pop your ears after a flight or bracing yourself to lift something heavy. That's Valsalva's maneuver, where you're forcefully exhaling against a closed glottis. That can increase your intraalveolar pressure to a whopping plus 100 mmHg. And Muller's maneuver is the opposite, forcefully inhaling with a closed glottis. That can plummet your intraalveolar pressure down to minus 80 mmHg.
Oh, yeah, those are some intense sensations. It's wild to think that we can manipulate these pressures within our own bodies just by changing how we breathe.
Exactly. But those are extreme examples. In normal breathing, the pressure changes are much more subtle. But there's another pressure we need to talk about. Intrapleural pressure.
Okay, and what's that all about?
This is where it gets really fascinating. Intrapleural pressure is the pressure within the pleural cavity, that tiny space between your lungs and your chest wall. And here's the key takeaway. It's always negative during normal breathing. Always.
Wait, always negative. Why is that? What keeps it that way?
Great question. It all boils down to this constant tug of war between your lungs and your chest wall.
Okay.
Imagine your lungs are like a balloon that's always trying to deflate. Well, your rib cage is like this cage that's always trying to expand outward.
Huh.
That tension between them, that constant push and pull, is what creates the negative intrapleural pressure.
So it's like a built-in suction system that keeps our lungs from collapsing.
Precisely. It's like they're constantly being held open by this negative pressure even when we're not actively breathing. And this constant negative pressure is crucial for a number of reasons. We'll dive into those in part 2.
Whoa, cliffhanger. I can't wait to hear more. But I have to say, I'm already blown away by how much complexity is packed into every breath.
Just wait, there's even more to uncover. We'll be back soon to explore the role of surface tension in the alveoli and delve into how our bodies regulate and control this incredible process.
Awesome. Stay tuned, deep divers, for part 2, where we'll continue our journey into the fascinating world of respiration.
Welcome back, deep divers. Last time we left off on a bit of a cliffhanger,
Yeah.
talking about that constant negative pressure in the pleural cavity.
Right.
And besides keeping our lungs inflated, what else does this negative pressure do for us?
Well, it's a great question, and it turns out this negative pressure is a real multitasker. Remember venous and lymphatic return?
Uh-huh.
Those are vital processes for circulation and immunity, and guess what? They're also influenced by that negative pressure in the pleural cavity.
Okay, now this is really blowing my mind. We're talking about breathing, which is like air in and out.
Right.
But now it's connected to blood flow in the immune system.
Yeah.
I need you to explain this connection because I'm not seeing it. Okay, so think of it this way. That gentle suction created by the negative pressure helps draw blood and lymph fluid back towards the heart.
Okay.
It's like this little boost that assists with circulation and waste removal throughout the body.
So it's not just the heart pumping that moves these fluids around.
Right.
There's this extra help from the respiratory system.
Exactly. It's a beautiful example of how interconnected our bodily systems really are.
Yeah.
And there's one more fascinating thing about intrapleural pressure.
Okay.
It can actually be used as a measure of lung elasticity.
Wait, so the more negative the pressure, the more elastic the lungs.
Precisely. And this has real clinical significance because if the pressure becomes less negative, it could be a sign of decreased lung elasticity, which can happen with certain respiratory diseases.
So doctors can actually measure this pressure to assess lung health?
That's right. It's another tool they can use to get a better picture of what's going on with the respiratory system. But we've been focusing a lot on pressure. And while it is essential, there's another fascinating player in the mechanics of breathing: surface tension.
Okay, surface tension, that's what makes water droplets beat up, right? I'm having trouble picturing how that applies to breathing.
It's all about those millions of tiny air sacs in your lungs, the alveoli. Imagine them as tiny bubbles, each coated with this thin film of fluid.
Okay.
And just like water droplets, this fluid lining creates surface tension.
Okay, so our lungs are basically filled with millions of tiny soap bubbles.
In a sense, yes.
Yeah.
And this surface tension wants to collapse those bubbles inward, making the air sacs smaller.
So we have this inward pull from surface tension and the outward pull from the negative intrapleural pressure.
Right.
It's like a constant balancing act.
Exactly. And to help maintain this balance, our lungs produce a substance called surfactant.
Surfactant, what's that?
Think of it as a kind of soap for your lungs. It reduces the surface tension in the alveoli, preventing them from collapsing too much.
Okay.
This makes it easier for your lungs to inflate and deflate with each breath.
Wow. Our bodies think of everything. So without surfactant, our lungs would be super stiff, making breathing really difficult.
Precisely. Surfactant is essential for maintaining that delicate balance of forces within our lungs, ensuring that each breath is effortless and efficient.
I'm seeing a theme here. Everything in the respiratory system is about balance and efficiency.
Yeah.
But we've been talking a lot about like the mechanics, the muscles, the pressures.
Right.
What about the control mechanisms? How does our body know how fast to breathe or when to take a deeper breath?
That's where the brain comes in.
Yeah.
The control of respiration is a complex interplay of neural and chemical signals. It all starts in the brainstem, specifically an area called the medulla oblongata. This is like the control center for breathing.
So there's a part of our brain that's dedicated to breathing. That's pretty wild.
It is. And within the medulla, there are groups of neurons that generate the basic rhythm of breathing.
Okay.
They send signals to the respiratory muscles, telling them when to contract and relax.
It's like a built-in pacemaker for our lungs.
Yeah.
But how does it know when to speed up or slow down our breathing? Like when I'm exercising, my breath gets way faster.
That's where chemical signals come into play. Chemoreceptors, specialized sensors located in the brainstem and major blood vessels, they constantly monitor the levels of carbon dioxide, oxygen, and pH in our blood.
Okay.
They're like these little detectives always looking for clues about what our body needs.
Okay, so our blood chemistry basically dictates how we breathe.
Exactly. When you exercise, your muscles produce more carbon dioxide, which increases its concentration in your blood. The chemoreceptors pick up on this change and send signals to the medulla, which then ramps up your breathing rate and depth to expel that excess CO2 and bring in more oxygen.
It's like this incredible feedback loop, constantly fine-tuning our breathing based on what's happening in our bodies. But what about conscious control? Can we override this system sometimes?
Absolutely. We do have some voluntary control over our breathing, but it's limited.
Okay.
Think about holding your breath. You can do it for a while, but eventually that urge to breathe becomes overwhelming.
Yeah, it's like your body just takes over. So it's a hybrid system.
Yeah.
With like automatic and manual controls.
Exactly. And that dual control is essential for survival. The automatic system keeps us breathing even when we're not thinking about it.
Right.
While the voluntary system allows us to adapt our breathing for activities like speaking, singing, or even blowing out birthday candles.
So we have this amazing system that keeps us alive without us having to lift a finger, but we can also step in and take control when needed. It's like having a really good co-pilot.
That's a great analogy. And this delicate dance between automatic and voluntary control is happening all the time, ensuring that we're getting the right amount of oxygen no matter what we're doing.
This is all so incredible. I never realized breathing was so complex, but I feel like we're just scratching the surface here.
We are. There's still so much to explore, like the role of stretch receptors in the lungs, the influence of emotions on our breathing, and the various respiratory reflexes that protect our airways.
Whoa, there's even more.
Oh yeah, way more. But for now, let's just take a moment to appreciate how much we've already learned about this vital process.
Yeah.
From the microscopic forces at play in the alveoli to the complex neural control mechanisms in our brains, it's truly remarkable how much is going on beneath the surface of each breath we take.
Welcome back, deep divers. We've journeyed deep into the inner workings of our respiratory system, exploring the muscles and the pressures and even the brain's role in controlling our breath. But we've mainly focused on what happens when we're just, like, chilling, right?
That's right. We've laid the groundwork for understanding those basic mechanics of respiration. But now it's time to take things up a notch.
Okay.
And see how this incredible system adapts to different environments and challenges.
Because let's be real, we don't spend all our time just sitting around. We climb mountains, we run marathons, we even hold our breath for fun sometimes.
Exactly. And in each of those scenarios, our respiratory system has to adjust and compensate to meet those changing demands. It's a testament to its remarkable flexibility and resilience.
Okay, so let's start with something I've always been curious about. High altitude. I mean, you hear stories of people getting altitude sickness in the mountains.
Yeah.
What's actually happening in their bodies?
Well, as you ascend to higher elevations, the air pressure decreases.
Okay.
That means there are fewer oxygen molecules packed into each breath,
Huh.
even though you're taking in the same volume of air.
So it's like the air is thinner and each breath is less satisfying oxygen-wise.
Exactly. And this can lead to altitude sickness with symptoms ranging from headaches and fatigue to nausea and difficulty breathing. It's your body's way of saying, hey, we're not getting enough oxygen up here.
That sounds rough. So how does our body deal with this oxygen shortage?
It's pretty amazing, actually. Your body kicks into a series of adaptations to try and compensate. First, your breathing rate and depth increase, allowing you to take in more air and extract as much oxygen as possible from that thin air.
So it's like your body's trying to like overcompensate
Right.
by working harder to breathe.
Exactly. But that's just the beginning. Over time, your body starts producing more red blood cells.
Huh.
Those are the cells responsible for carrying oxygen throughout your body. It's like boosting the capacity of your internal oxygen delivery system.
So more red blood cells mean more oxygen can get to the muscles and organs,
Right.
even with less oxygen in each breath.
Precisely. And to further enhance oxygen uptake, the blood vessels in your lungs actually dilate,
Okay.
allowing more blood to flow through and pick up oxygen from the alveoli.
Wow. Our bodies are seriously smart. They're like, okay, low oxygen. We got this. We'll adjust. We'll adapt. We'll keep going.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
And these adaptations highlight just how crucial oxygen is for our survival.
Mm-hmm.
Our bodies will go to great lengths to maintain a steady supply.
Speaking of going to great lengths, what about holding our breath? How long can we actually go without breathing before our body says, nope, not happening?
Well, that depends on a lot of factors, like your lung capacity, your fitness level, and your tolerance to carbon dioxide buildup.
Yeah.
Some people are naturally better at holding their breath than others.
Yeah. I've got friends who can hold their breath forever, and I'm over here turning blue after 30 seconds.
But there's a limit for everyone.
Right.
When you hold your breath, carbon dioxide levels start to rise in your blood,
Yeah.
triggering those chemoreceptors we talked about earlier. Remember,
Right.
they're like the blood chemistry detectives?
They send the signal to the medulla, which is like, hey, time to breathe.
Exactly. Eventually, the urge to breathe becomes overwhelming,
Mm.
and your body forces you to take a breath whether you want to or not.
Mm.
It's a powerful survival mechanism designed to prevent you from, well, suffocating.
Makes sense. Our bodies aren't going to let us win a breath-holding contest if it means passing out in the process. Okay, last scenario, exercise. I know my breathing goes crazy when I'm working out. What's going on there?
Well, think about what's happening when you exercise.
Okay.
Your muscles are working harder.
Right.
They need more oxygen to fuel that activity,
Mm-hmm.
and they're producing more carbon dioxide as a byproduct.
Okay.
It's like a double whammy for your respiratory system.
So we need to increase oxygen intake and carbon dioxide removal at the same time.
Exactly. And your respiratory system rises to the occasions spectacularly.
Okay.
Your breathing rate and depth increase dramatically sometimes by a factor of 10 or more.
10 times. No wonder I feel like I'm sucking wind sometimes. But what's driving this massive increase in breathing?
Those trusty chemoreceptors are at it again, sensing those changes in blood chemistry and signaling the medulla to adjust your breathing accordingly. But there's also input from proprioceptors,
Okay.
which are sensors in your muscles and joints that detect movement and effort.
So it's like our body is anticipating the increased demand for oxygen based on how hard our muscles are working.
Precisely. It's this remarkably efficient system that ensures your muscles are getting the oxygen they need to keep going. And as you push yourself harder, your breathing can reach a point where it feels like you're gasping for air. This is often called your ventilatory threshold.
Oh, yeah. I know that feeling. It's like hitting a wall.
Exactly. And pushing beyond that threshold can lead to fatigue and that burning sensation in your muscles as lactic acid starts to build up.
It's like your body is saying, okay, we're reaching our limit here. Time to ease up.
Exactly. It's important to listen to those signals and pace yourself accordingly, especially if you're new to exercise or pushing beyond your usual limits.
Great advice. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
You have.
It's amazing how adaptable and resilient our respiratory system is, whether we're at high altitudes holding our breath or pushing our limits during a workout.
Yeah, it really is. And I hope this exploration has given you a newfound appreciation for that intricate dance of muscles and pressures and neural signals that keep us breathing no matter the challenge.
Absolutely. I know I'll never take breathing for granted again.
And that's the takeaway I hope you'll carry with you. The next time you take a breath, whether it's a deep cleansing inhale after a yoga class or a gasp of air after sprinting up a flight of stairs, take a moment to appreciate the incredible complexity and power of your respiratory system. It's truly one of the marvels of the human body.
Well said. And thank you, deep divers, for joining us on this incredible journey into the mechanics of respiration. We hope you learned something new and maybe even gained a newfound respect for the simple act of breathing. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep breathing.